Well, large numbers of people, many of them women, marched in protest in Washington to basically show their disappointment with the inauguration of Donald Trump. And smaller groups of people went around Washington and other places in the world, as a matter of fact, smashing windows to show their love of democracy. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your right angle on the Donald Trump inauguration protests, because I think all of these things have a common theme, and you may find this to be a little bit heretical or controversial, but I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think any of these protests are serious. For example, you see Madonna up there spouting off her F-bombs, and you saw Ashley Judd talking about all of her plumbing issues, and you see these people here on the streets in their chicken costumes and so on. That doesn't strike me as a serious group of people or serious spokespeople for a serious group of people. And on the other hand, these kids you see are not exactly what I would call a cross-section of America. So, Scotty, let's start with you. If you look closely at the black, hoods, black masks rather, black jackets, black shoes, black boots, what I see are males, 21 to 21 and a half years old, who look very white to me and very, very privileged, out there on a rampage, throwing stuff through windows because they feel like it gets them a chance to be, champions of fight against Rage Against the Machine. Do you get that sense? I don't see any kind of cross-section in America or even street anger in those violent protests.
No, and I think these kinds of rallies are great to leave an impression. The only problem with them is you can't leave any particular impression. I mean, you just leave a general impression that there's a lot of people out there and they're upset. And about what? Well, we're not exactly sure, because every topic, every axe that needs to be ground was grinded during that time. You also realize that, for example, when Donald Trump was campaigning for office and would go around the country and people would show up at his rallies, I guarantee you nobody was going there for the great musical entertainment. Trump had a real knack for finding sort of really hokey warm-up groups that nobody's going to sleep in a sleeping bag outside the stadium to get in to hear that. They were coming to see Trump. But when you see Democratic events and progressive events, what you see is they understand the appeal of these superstars. And so they bring in Madonna or Ashley Judd or these other. They had a whole committee, actually, that was established to bring in famous people. And those people are the draw. And so what you attract to that rally then is a lot of people who don't really have any axe to grind whatsoever. They just like, hey, well, this looks like a great event. There'll be a bunch of women, great entertainment. We can hang out with people. We can go to Washington, D.C. And so it's just a mess. I mean, when it's over, if you say, well, what was this all about? And you say, well, it was about more women than Donald Trump had at his inauguration. I'll tell you that. That's what that was about. But what else? We don't know. What is it about the Trump administration that they would like us to change? So, years ago, I wrote this satirical piece at scrappleface.com, my satire website, about a senator who changed his mind as a result of people chanting outside of his office, because it's just absurd. And even years before that, when I was in college, they actually paid to send me to Washington, D.C. The Daily Collegian, the student newspaper, sent me down to cover this rally that was the Get the U.S. Out of El Salvador rally. So at least it had a purpose. But when I got down there, even as a 19-year-old kid, I'm looking around. And frankly, I was anti-Ronald Reagan. I was a leftist. And I'm looking at this stuff and I'm going, look at these goofballs. Who's going to pay any attention to them? This whole thing is ridiculous. And I can still remember to this day all these people very seriously thrusting their fists in the air going, Ronald Reagan, he's no good. Send him back to Hollywood. And then I realized that every protest since then, there's been the same chant with different words. It's just a waste of time.
We were talking just before the show about how people get their information on things from other people, and you cannot find an example of mindlessness any greater than a bunch of people walking down the streets chanting the same thing. If it'll fit in a chant, it's probably not a real problem. Which is a nice segue, Steve, to the forgetting about the street violence for a moment, talking about the large women's march there. Now, obviously, there were a lot of people that were dressed up as chickens, and you get that pretty much everywhere. But I was struck by the fact that the so-called leaders of this movement to show how women are completely independent and perfectly capable of running a government just as they are, as men are, couldn't talk about anything other than women's issues. It was just this gigantic, enormous sense of hypocrisy to me. They didn't talk about any policies other than the fact that they're women and they don't like Donald Trump.
Yeah, it wasn't even a protest about that so much as it was a protest about reproductive body parts with the hats. I don't know. You talk about the unseriousness of this, but there was some serious stuff here, and if this isn't a bad way of putting it, the seriousness is how unserious it is. Because look at it this way: they understand deep in their bones, even if they don't understand it at an intellectual level. Because I'm not sure if you're wearing a pussy hat, you have an intellectual level. If you're smashing up a Muslim immigrant's limousine and putting him out of business, I'm not sure right. You have an intellectual level. However, deep in their bones, they understand the magnitude of their loss and what they face over the next 4 to 8 years. And if this is a real turnaround, if this is a real sea change in this country, then they are on the outs for a very long time. Barack Obama cost them almost 1,000 elected offices across the nation. We've got a Republican Congress. We've got a Republican Senate. We're about to get 1, maybe 3 more conservatives put on the Supreme Court over the next 4 years. The sea change is remarkable, and it could be enduring. We're talking about cutting federal payrolls. We're talking about actual headcount reductions. We're talking now about cutting $10 trillion out of the federal budget over the next 10 years, while we cut taxes by $5 trillion over the next 10 years. If any of this, even if it is just enacted in a small way, but in half measures, is such a political repudiation of the left and everything it represents, and it is such a cultural repudiation of the left and everything it represents, that they know what they've lost and what they have yet to lose, what everything of theirs is at risk right now. And yet this, what we saw this weekend, is the best they can muster. Can you imagine that, Bill? You don't have to.
I can, and I do. I'd like to just address the fact that there were 2 different kinds of protests. The large women's march, obviously there's a lot of people are very upset about things, and many of those people are serious people, but the spokespeople didn't seem to be. And the movement itself didn't seem to be, because a serious protest is a focused protest. This to me seemed more of a just, we don't like what happened and here we are. It looked an awful lot like virtue signaling to me, and since there were no actual issues being promoted, to me it just looked like a giant temper tantrum. We have to understand, too, guys, that when we were kids growing up, we saw films of, and our heroes were people in World War II. John Wayne and all the rest of it. These millennials, most of these people protesting rather young, have never known anything as heroes other than protesters. They're the result of left-wing parents and the left wing and the hippies in the 60s and so on, and all the civil rights protests. That is heroism to them. That is importance to them. So they've been inculcated with this entire idiom of protest as being the highest point of American heroism. Now, as to these kids in the black masks who are smashing windows at Bank of America and so on, this is hooliganism straight and simple. This is simply people out there smashing things because you can smash them. This is a 7-year-old kid throwing a rock at a window because there's nobody going to stop him. I think we've been seeing an awful lot of this over the last 20 years, but the last 8 years especially, because the President of the United States, recently departed, was a rabble-rouser, essentially what he was. He was a street organizer. He was a protester. He was sympathetic to all of these people. But these kids roaming around, and as I say, they all seem to be, to me, uniformly white, uniformly young. They look like college students to me. Is also an indication that they're not serious. I think they're out on a romp, and they haven't paid a price for this so far, but I suspect that those days may be about to change. If you tolerate or, in fact, endorse violence in the streets, guess what you're going to get more of? For Steve Green, Scott Ott, and the rest of the Bill Whittle crew here at BillWhittle.com, I'm Bill. Thank you very much for your membership, for those paying members who make it possible, and we'll see you next time.